The summer sun bathed the small town of Maplewood in a golden glow, its light filtering through the oak trees that lined the quiet streets. Alex adjusted his tie in the mirror, his sharp blue eyes reflecting a mixture of fatigue and determination. The morning was like any other, routine, predictable. Emily's voice called from the kitchen, warm and familiar. "Alex, breakfast is ready," he sighed, tugging his blazer over his broad shoulders. Emily had been up early, as always, preparing eggs and toast and humming a tune he vaguely recognized from their early days together. Their life was comfortable, almost too comfortable, a pattern that had become more of a safety net than a source of excitement. As he stepped into the kitchen, the scent of coffee greeted him, along with Emily's smile. She wore her favorite yellow sundress, her auburn hair tied in a loose ponytail. "Big day today?" she asked, placing a plate in front of him. "Just the usual," Alex replied, avoiding her gaze. Emily studied him for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly, but she let it go. She had learned over the years not to press when he was in one of his moods. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Emily's face lit up. "That must be Julia!" she exclaimed, rushing to the door. Alex followed her, curious but not particularly enthusiastic. Julia was Emily's younger sister, the wild card of the family. She had a knack for drawing attention wherever she went, her vivacious energy a sharp contrast to Emily's steady warmth. When Emily opened the door, Julia stood there, suitcase in hand, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She was stunning, as always, her confident smile lighting up the room. "Julia!" Emily pulled her into a hug. "Hey, sis," Julia said, her voice smooth and playful. Her eyes met Alex's over Emily's shoulder, and she flashed a quick, knowing smile. Alex nodded politely. "Julia, good to see you again." "Likewise, Alex," she replied, her tone light but with an edge he couldn't quite place. The tension was subtle but undeniable, a spark that neither of them fully acknowledged but both felt. The evening air was crisp as the three of them sat on the back porch, the soft hum of crickets filling the silence between their conversations. Julia leaned back in her chair, her legs curled under her, sipping a glass of wine. "So, Alex," Julia said, tilting her head with a playful smile, "how's the world of architecture treating you?" Alex glanced up from his drink. "Busy as always. Deadlines never end." "I bet," Julia replied, her gaze lingering on him for a second too long. "Emily always said you were a perfectionist." Emily laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh, he's the worst. He even reorganized the kitchen when we first moved in. I couldn't find anything for weeks." Alex smirked. "I was optimizing it." Julia chuckled, her laugh rich and melodic. "Sounds like you need a creative outlet. Something fun, outside of work." "I'm fine," Alex said, a little too quickly. Emily placed a hand on his arm. "Julia's great at finding ways to make life more colorful. Maybe you should take her advice." The conversation shifted, but Alex found himself stealing glances at Julia. She had a magnetic energy, a confidence that was both intoxicating and dangerous. She caught him looking once, her lips curving into a small, secretive smile. Act 2, growing tension. The days passed, and Julia became an integral part of their household. She brought laughter and spontaneity, filling the gaps that had quietly formed between Alex and Emily. One afternoon, Alex came home early to find Julia sketching in the living room. Her notebook was filled with vibrant designs, her pencil moving with effortless grace. "You're talented," he said, startling her. Julia looked up, her eyes bright. "Thanks. I guess creativity runs in the family." Alex hesitated, then sat across from her. "Do you ever think about collaborating? Combining architecture and fashion?" Julia raised an eyebrow. Interesting idea. Maybe we should try. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. From that day on, they began working on a small project, a conceptual design that merged their worlds. It was harmless at first, late nights spent sketching and brainstorming. Emily often joined them, but as the weeks passed, her presence became less frequent. One evening, Emily excused herself early, citing a long day at work. Alex and Julia stayed behind, the room bathed in the warm glow of a single lamp. You know, Julia said, leaning back in her chair, you're not as serious as you let on. Alex chuckled. Is that a compliment? Maybe. Her eyes sparkled mischievously. I think there's more to you than meets the eye. Alex met her gaze, the unspoken tension crackling between them. He knew he should look away, but he didn't. Act 3. The affair had happened on a rainy night, the storm raging outside mirroring the turmoil inside. They had been working late again, laughter and wine blurring the lines they had carefully maintained. When Julia leaned over to show him a sketch, her shoulder brushed against his. The contact was electric, a jolt that sent his heart racing. Julia, he said, his voice low. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. What? He trailed off, the words dying on his lips. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the world outside fading away. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they kissed. It was urgent, desperate, and utterly forbidden. When they pulled apart, reality crashed down around them. This can't happen, Alex said, his voice shaky. I know, Julia whispered, but her eyes said otherwise. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Alex tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but the weight of guilt was suffocating. He avoided Julia when he could, yet her presence in the house was inescapable. Every glance, every accidental touch, reignited the fire he desperately tried to extinguish. Julia, on the other hand, was composed, almost too composed. She acted as though nothing had changed, but Alex noticed the lingering looks, the subtle smirks that sent his mind spiraling. Emily remained blissfully unaware, her trust in Alex and Julia unshaken. She often spoke about how grateful she was to have her sister around, how Julia's visit had brought new energy into their lives. The tension came to a head one evening when Emily was out at a school fundraiser. Alex had just returned from work, and Julia was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. You've been avoiding me, Julia said without looking up. Alex froze in the doorway. I think that's for the best. She set the knife down and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For who? You? Or Emily? His jaw tightened. This isn't fair to her. And what about what's fair to us? She challenged, stepping closer. There is no us, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Julia smirked, a bitter edge to her expression. You can lie to yourself, Alex, but you can't lie to me. Before he could respond, she closed the distance between them, her hand brushing against his. The touch was enough to break his resolve. He pulled her into a kiss, their passion consuming them once again. Act 4, Revelation and Fallout. The affair continued in secret, each stolen moment a mix of exhilaration and dread. But secrets never stay hidden for long. Emily noticed the changes first. Alex's late nights, Julia's sudden quietness whenever she entered the room. At first, she brushed it off, blaming her own insecurities. But as the signs grew harder to ignore, doubt began to creep in. One evening, while cleaning the living room, Emily found a sketchbook Julia had left behind. Flipping through it, she stumbled upon a page filled with drawings of Alex, his profile, his hands, even the way he smiled. The intimacy of the sketches sent a chill down her spine. Confrontation was inevitable. Are you cheating on me? Emily's voice was sharp and trembling as she cornered Alex in their bedroom that night. His heart sank, and for a moment he considered lying. But the weight of the truth was too much to bear. I made a mistake, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's face crumpled as the reality of his words hit her. With who? When Alex didn't answer, her eyes widened in realization. Julia! Emily's scream was a mix of rage and heartbreak. She stormed out of the room, her sobs echoing through the house. Downstairs, Julia was waiting, having overheard the confrontation. When Emily confronted her, the betrayal cut even deeper. How could you? Emily's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. You're my sister! I didn't mean for this to happen, Julia said, but the words felt hollow. Didn't mean for it to happen? Emily repeated, her voice rising. You destroyed everything, Julia. Everything. Act 5, Resolution. The house became a battleground in the days that followed. Emily refused to speak to Alex or Julia, her pain too raw. Alex tried to apologize, to explain, but nothing he said could undo the damage. Julia packed her bags and left, unable to bear the weight of her actions. Before she walked out the door, she turned to Alex. I didn't want it to end like this, she said softly. Neither did I, he replied, his voice heavy with regret. Emily and Alex's marriage hung by a thread. Counseling sessions were suggested, but Emily wasn't sure she could ever forgive him. As for Julia, she moved to a different city, vowing to rebuild her life and learn from her mistakes. She and Emily didn't speak again for months, the chasm between them seemingly irreparable. Epilogue. Months later, Emily sat alone in the garden, the autumn leaves falling around her. Alex approached cautiously, his hands in his pockets. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. Emily looked at him, her expression unreadable. I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were, Alex. But maybe we can find a way forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope.